you can cover your assets.
Hi, I'm attorney J.J. Childers, and I'd like to welcome you to this special presentation that I call An Introduction to Estate Planning. Now, the topic of estate planning is one of the most important when it comes to protecting your assets. However, it's also one of the least enjoyable for many people because it forces them to deal with an unpleasant subject, death. In this presentation, I'm going to make this task as simple, straightforward, and as painless as possible. I'm going to help you to gain a better understanding of this important topic so that you can do what it takes to effectively pass on your estate to your heirs and beneficiaries. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to helping you plan your estate.
And I'm Roby Brock. The topic of estate planning is one that people typically don't like to talk about. Not only that, many people even believe that estate planning is only for the truly wealthy. In this presentation, you're going to see why estate planning is such an important part of everyone's financial plan.
JJ, there seems to be a lot of information out there nowadays about estate planning. Now, what does estate planning really mean?
Well, really, when you talk about estate planning, basically what you're talking about is the process of planning your estate. Now, specifically, it's the process of transferring wealth from one generation to the next. Really, how to transfer all of your assets to your heirs and beneficiaries. In most instances, that'll be to other family members, but you may have charities, other organizations. Fact is, there are many people that don't necessarily have family members that they want to leave their estate to, or may not have other family members, period. So you've got to factor in what it is that you want to do with your estate. Now, it doesn't have to be an overly complex plan. In many instances, it might be, but the key is you've got to have a plan put in place.
When you talk about putting a plan in place, now who is it that really should be considering a plan like this?
Well, really, anyone with an estate needs an estate plan. Well, everyone has an estate. And see, most people don't realize that they have an estate. It may be a small estate, but bottom line, they've got an estate. Well, if everyone has an estate, and everyone that has an estate needs an estate plan, by definition, that really means that everyone needs an estate plan.
You say that everyone needs an estate plan, but I've always thought that there had to be a certain dollar amount that your estate needed to be before you needed a plan like that at all.
Well, I'd say I hear that a lot. And the reason I hear that is that it's a very common misconception. And the reason that it's so common is that that's what people have been taught. We've been taught that unless your estate is worth in excess of $1 million or $2 million, that you don't need an estate plan. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. You see, the key is the overall process runs much smoother if you've got a plan put into place, regardless of your overall asset size, regardless of the size of your estate, regardless of your assets. Bottom line, you need to have essentially a plan, a laid out map, a blueprint for how you want your assets to be transferred upon your death, so that make sure that you take care of your loved ones.
Why is it so important to have an estate plan?
Well, one of the reasons is that an estate plan can do a lot of different things. Number one, it can help you to provide for that smooth transition. Now, when I say that smooth transition, there are many different components that make up that overall transition. We're not just talking about assets. I mean, obviously, if you own real property, for instance, that real property is going to have to go through an overall process of being transferred, the title transferred from the deceased over to the new owner of that property. Well, but there are other little things, such as just individual assets. How would you want those assets taken care of? That's what many times people will have a will. Now, a will is a very important tool, and we'll talk about some various tools, but a will is what most people have been taught. Well, even though most people have been taught that they need a will, unfortunately, most people don't have a will. And part of the reason for that is that people don't want to think about their death. They don't want to have to confront their own mortality, so they just don't want to think about these unpleasant thoughts, because nobody wants to think about leaving behind their family and thinking about their family without them as a part of that family. And I know that that's something that's very difficult, but it's one of the most kind, loving things you could possibly do for your family, because here's what I oftentimes encounter. I'll have a student at my seminar, maybe a client that comes into the office, and one of the things that they'll mention to me is that they want to put an estate plan into place because they don't want to do to their children what was done to them. And what I mean is not, maybe not as bad as it sounds, but I've had clients and students who have come that have said, well, my mother or my father passed away and didn't leave behind any instructions on how they wanted me to handle things. Now, instructions for what, you might ask? Well, instructions for, do I want to have a funeral? Would I like to be buried or would I like to be cremated? If I want to have that funeral, is there a particular preacher, for instance, that I might want to have deliver the eulogy? Is there anything specifically that I would want to have included in my obituary? Is there anyone I would want notified upon my death? Is there anyone